you'd say, well, you can't build there because according to our ordinance, you'd be within the fall radius of the structure.
We can't, what goes up on one structure can't impact what can happen, or on one property can't dictate what can happen on another property. We can't, if I build a house next to this parcel, what gets built on this parcel can't prevent me from utilizing my parcel.
I'm still against it.
I have to protect the people on the other parcels.
Yeah.
And so,
But
just because you're in there first doesn't mean that everybody around me, nobody can build on the adjacent parcels. So if I go out into a bare site and I put up a 200-foot tower, but I'm only putting it on a parcel that's 50 feet, I have just now eliminated anybody building on the adjacent parcels.
Patrick, is that site with that 1.1 preclude the site that we're looking at right now? Is it closer than 1.1?
Yes.
Yeah.
You'd be on the one you're looking at is a very small
Right.
lot.
And if you look around the city, we've tried to find a spot, and first of all, you got to change your ordinance, which you are working on right now. But even if you do, you're going to limit cell phone tower construction in Brandon pretty much.
You'd likely
Completely.
be 1.1 times the height of the tower away from the school or the house that's across Sioux, or I think their apartments kind of northwest. You would be 1.1 times height that way, but you would not be to the property line.
Pretty common in most cities. Just go into Sioux Falls, you'll see it's not 1.1 to the next property line in almost 90% of the towers. You have to move your towers out of town, and that defeats the purpose of cell phone coverage to your residents then.
I hear what you're saying. I had the same concern as Brian. I was thinking the same thing. So at least that's something that I do think we need to consider is if a residential property happened to be near this and they had a house that happened to be built, like the properties across Sioux, some of those are bigger lots, and if a house burned down and they wanted to resituate their house, I don't want to limit property owners for something future because of something they had no control over. So there's probably different ways we can look at this, but I have the same concern. And I understand that property that's been talked about is really small, and unfortunately, we're going to try our best to craft something that'll work, because I recognize that the city of Brandon's going to need to expand this. I don't necessarily know that we're going to be able to craft something that might work for that property that's been discussed, because that's not the point of our ordinance change. But I do think we're trying to take a good faith look at how to make this work in the city of Brandon, because I actually live in that neighborhood, and I have seen the maps that the other gentleman brought in, and I identified that, like, yes, I've actually recognized that our service isn't quite as strong. And when I go to my basement, I do lose calls sometimes. So I recognize the concern fully.
Yeah. I think if you did a study based on the ordinance of 1.1 times the height of the tower to the nearest property line, and then you overlaid it with the kind of adjustment you're going to do to your ordinance and where you would allow towers, you're going to probably find you can't build a tower hardly anywhere in Brandon city limits. So that's what you're sort of up against. I hear what you're saying, and I think in general it makes sense. If you think the worst case scenario, somebody builds a garage or even a house later, and it's within a 1.1, let's call it a fall radius of the tower, they're taking a risk. I mean, they're going to see the tower there, so it'd be a risk that they'd be deciding to take. I don't know that you need to protect them, and I'm just telling you, every other city, and including Sioux Falls next door, Harrisburg, T, they're not doing that.
Patrick, where do we find the previous packets? Because you had some sample ordinances, and I seem to recall those were pretty
most of what's left should be the examples provided by the applicant at the last meeting, and a couple of the Ben Rifle examples are still in the folder. The previous packet, we would have to rehunt from the city's website. I don't think I left it.
I didn't bring them, sorry, so can't even show you 'em.
Hopefully you can access the internet. I know sometimes it's a little difficult with some of the laptops.
So we have that concern. Do we have other concerns about what Patrick has put together to give him some direction?
Would it be useful for you all? I don't know if we have maybe we do with GIS have the ability to do it to draw. Say we'll take a 150-foot tall tower as an example and draw a 1.1, each way circle and place them all over the place and see what's left. My guess is you're probably looking at some of the industrial park property, probably McCarty Park, Aspen Park, some of the school lots. I don't know if it maybe a church or two, but that's probably what you're looking at. Maybe some of the apartments technically have but that certainly wouldn't be. If you were interested in just to the property line, the apartments would. I don't know how you'd want to look at that. Would you want it right next to the apartment building? Would you want it separated from the habitable structure anyway, even though it's different than the property line? So, So you are probably limited in space.
And at least right now, we've talked about the institutional zone, so the habitable structure term, so that would include a school, a church?
Yes. It wouldn't
Okay.
include like a lawn shed where
Yeah.
hopefully no one's living in the lawn shed. But regularly where people go in and spend time. As an applicant, would you have any issues with that if you needed to prove a significant gap in coverage and the least feasible alternative that you all paid for it? Would you have an issue?
That's fine, we're used to that.
Okay.
We can do the study, you can do the study, but
We'd,
that's,
we'd likely have to hire an engineer to look it over, and of course,
and you're talking about RF coverage, like cell phone bars on your phone kind of coverage, right? Like a gap in that, or
it's
what kind of
it's the
study?
FCC's kind of all else fails test that you in order to their approval will override anything at the local level if you can show there's a significant gap in coverage and it's the only way to fill it.
Yeah,
Even if it's
nice.
right, it could be right on top of a school and that's the only place and that's the gap in coverage, then it would override their ability to
Right,
say yes
yeah.
or no.
Yeah, that's no problem. We wouldn't have any problem with paying for a study like that. I would just, the only thing I might say to that is we could do that if, I think that's sort of an extreme case because I think generally,
That's
like
kind of what it's
our
designed for.
application
There's no
or-
other way.
yeah, our application would be, we're just literally trying to fill a gap that the cell phone carriers have come to us and asked us to fill. So they already know that the answer to that. So you'd be sort of getting a second verification, which is fine.
So you had mentioned that you had some
Yeah.
comments, and what were those?
Yeah, so if you look at number 3, general requirements, I have a handout. I could give you guys all a handout that goes.
They have this thing in front of them. I got it.
That one that I sent to you?
Yep, this should be
Okay.
the second one you sent.
Okay, great. So on
Where- so
3,
Where is this coming from first before we get into it?
it's in your draft. It's another copy of your draft.
So this is just a reposting of kind of the general requirements. It's what you look at these are our standards for approval, and then the if all else fails test would be if this doesn't work and they can prove that. So these are kind of these would be our standards that you all would review. This would include the separation distances and setbacks and distances from each other and that kind of thing.
And these are your comments on here then?
Yeah, my
Okay.
comments are the red,
Okay,
or my proposed changes to what Patrick has drafted are in red. The yellow is my commentary as to why I'm proposing those changes. So 3A, Patrick drafted 1.1 times from the nearest habitable structure, not from the property line. We were okay with that, so I didn't have a comment there. But the last sentence talks about getting written consent from an adjacent property owner. I don't know what you guys do here, but to me, that's just asking for trouble here at this commission, because somebody's probably going to come in and say no. And I think I would, if I were you, I would take their comment, but not ask them to sign off on it. That's like the next level, because they could just say no, and then you're stuck.
That language generally comes from the whole wind tower area where they do fall like trees.
Yeah.
And so most counties do require, if it's going to fall across your property, that you consent to it, whether that applies to cell towers or not. But that's where that language comes from. It's more designed for if you're impacted by the 0.001% chance it would fall, that you at least are aware and you're aware of your risk. But
I
that's
would,
not necessarily common in other ones. I just threw that out there mostly for your discussion because I know your concern is public safety.
so, yeah, and then I just have some comments about that right below that strike through in red. So then if you go down to D, I didn't really understand. Base station should not exceed 15 feet. I don't know if you want to try to explain that, Patrick, but I rewrote it the way I think I understand it.
Yep, the way you wrote it makes sense. So we consider the base station to be the facility attached to something that's not a tower. Say you attached to a water tower, you would have from the wall of the water tower 15 feet out.
Okay. So if the tower was we'd be proposing a monopole, which is a slender cylindrical pole. The base station equipment is what Patrick's talking about. I called it antenna systems. Can't extend further than 15 feet out from the edge of that.
I think
That
we're
pole.
thinking the same thing,
Thinking the same
just using
thing.
different words.
Okay. I think it'd just be more understandable for future users to use some variation or my language. So I'm just proposing that.
I think the base station is if it's attached to an existing structure versus an antenna. So you're talking about a monopole, and so monopole versus base station, they're two different. I think that's where the base
Oh,
station.
okay.
Does that make sense? Like
We use different language, I
yeah,
think.
But base station would be like water tower. The base
Oh.
station would be the water tower, and you can't see 15 feet out from that. You're talking about building them.
Yeah,
Mono.
in
Under
our
the
industry,
original language, D would not apply to a tower.
it wouldn't even apply to a tower. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, in our industry, a base station is the equipment on the ground inside the shed. That's your base station. The antenna systems are the equipment up on the structure. We don't usually call those base stations, so that's where I got confused.
I took that term from the FCC regs, so
Okay.
that's apparently what the FCC calls them.
Okay, I'd have to look at that, but yeah. Any questions about that? Otherwise, I'll talk about G.
And their revision to G makes sense. If obviously adding new equipment is going to have some visual change to the tower, so it makes sense.
And I think you got to sort of avoid the aesthetics because that's a settled matter with the FCC. They don't allow aesthetics or RF emissions as a reason for not allowing towers.
Oh, I'm sure we'll hear about that.
So if you liked his write-up and you were looking for some way to change it, I've proposed it to Patrick and the rest of you.
Kind of our big question at this point. How do you feel about them being in the institutional district? And it's kind of the setbacks. Do you want proximity setbacks? Is it to the property line? Is it to, if they are in the institutional district, it could be on the lot with something else. So say it is on the lot with the school. 1.1 times to the property line is one thing, but would you want a separation distance from the other use on the property? So that's kind of the two
I guess,
big
I,
considerations.
as I already mentioned, what goes on inside the property, I really don't care. If it goes on a school and the school doesn't care if it falls on their building, I don't care. What I'm concerned about is protecting people outside of that property, including adjacent landowners and right-of-ways.
I guess I'm on the other side of that a little bit, or in addition to that. I am concerned about with what's on the inside of the school, and I would like as much buffer as we can get. I don't know. I know the space is limited, but I know we can't not permit it because of what's emitted from antennas, but if we can find a space that it is permitted, I guess I would want as much buffer from the schools as we can get. However we can do that, that's what I would say. The other thing I guess I would throw out there is we've just rezoned a lot of our parks to institutional, where when we rezoned them, the towers weren't permitted, and now we're talking about putting towers there. That's gonna cause a lot of concerns. So, but again, I understand. I think that institutional is probably the right zone, but if especially on some of the smaller neighborhood parks, they probably won't fit in there anyway with setbacks, but there's going to be a lot of concern with allowing towers in our parks that we just rezoned, and towers weren't permitted when we rezoned it, and now they are. That's going to be kind of contentious, I think.
The reason I say I don't care what happens on the property, if the school wants to put a short tower on top of the Performing Arts Center, that's up to the school. That's not up to me, and I don't need to protect any landowners outside of that, as long as it doesn't impact those adjacent landowners. Now, same thing if the city, the city's already said they don't wanna, they're no longer gonna allow them to put on water towers. But if they did, if the city wanted to allow them to be put on their water towers, that's up to them. Obviously, that's not a habitable structure, but to me, the landowner should have some say in it as to what happens on their own property. So those are why I say what happens on that property, that's up to the property owner as far as what happens in the event of a failure.
And I hear what you're saying, Michael, about the adding use to, it requires a lot of consideration. And I understand with some small parks that I think when we consider setbacks and such things, we'll have to consider that. But I also think of the opposite, like totally off the top of my head, but I'm thinking, because it's in this area we're talking about, that maybe the expanded Aspen Park might be a good place where something like this could go. I don't know. There's a lot to consider. So I think when we get to looking at setbacks and separation, we can certainly take that stuff into account. Because definitely want to protect, and as we commonly talk about, protecting residential above pretty much everything.
So do you have enough to go on, Patrick, or do we have other issues we want to make him aware of?
Do we have kind of a consensus on what you want to measure from? We seem to have differing opinions. Obviously, not everyone has to 100%, be lockstep on everything. That's why we have public hearings, and that's why there's more than one person making them. But yeah, we can work on it some more and come
Yeah,
back.
let me just give you my last words. And I would just appeal to the commission to consider cell phone importance in your city, not just safety to the next adjacent property, and not limit your city cell phone usage by making your ordinance so strict that we just have to go build towers somewhere else, and so you can get coverage in your basement, things like that. So I would argue for 1.1 times a distance to the nearest habitable structure, as opposed to 1.1 times a distance to the nearest lot line. And you'll be in compliance with Sioux Falls if you allow that. So that would be my last words as you make your decision. And I'm sure I'll be back, or me or one of my partners will be back again next time. If you have any other questions for me.
Thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
and your patience. Appreciate it. All right, are we ready to move on to?
Yes, so the item 11 does have people here. Would we be willing to move that up and just shift 9, 10 down, since we do have people here for that?
Sure.
And we can get them on their way.
Sure. Yep. Thank you for your patience. Come on up, whoever's here.
So where this comes from is, of course, we do have existing properties that developed in town at the time different codes existed and before codes existed. So in order to subdivide a property, the new lots created and the things on them need to meet current zoning in order for us to approve the plat. Currently, some of the properties that are looking to be subdivided along North 9th with the existing buildings, whether the lot widths or the building setbacks themselves, usually some of the widths, some of the sizes, some of the setbacks in the front don't necessarily meet current code. So as we kind of did over on Augusta Place, are you all interested in pursuing a planned development path for the properties identified on the plat in front of you? And at this point, what I have written down as kind of a template PD is more or less just kind of a starting point. The big question is, are you interested in pursuing this route generally for this property?
Hi. Thank you for your patience. Why don't you just state your name and address, please?
Troy Sabers, 1531 River Oak Avenue in Brandon.
Okay. Thanks, Troy.
So, like I said, you guys got the printout here. I've lived in Brandon for 25 years. I work here. I live here. Right at about 18, almost 19 years ago, I got into property management. So I acquired these buildings on 9th Avenue. I built one, or had someone build one, and acquired the other ones. They've been great. I have great tenants. In the last couple of years, one, I'm getting a little older, but I've had some tenants approach me, see if I'd be willing to sell a unit. I've got tenants that lived in these places 7, 10, and 15 years. It's their home. They've asked. And so I was never interested in it, and one of them approached me and asked again, and I said I'd think about it. I'm not the expert on how to do this, so Ron Weber is a business friend, partner, that kind of stuff. I approached him to see what we got to do. Does it make sense? wow. Like I said, I have no issues, great tenants, they're beautiful properties, and I think they would make awesome affordable homes in Brandon.
And so the problem is now that to subdivide those setbacks don't work.
Some of the setbacks, some of the lot sizes, some of the lot widths. Correct. And in order to approve a plat, zoning has to be met. So in order to then make zoning work, you write a custom PD for it. And we have in the past, I know you all have expressed some, we don't want to solve all our problems this way, but we have in the past, so I just wanted to bring it for your thoughts. I know we did for sure for Augusta Place, but yeah, Brickwood has one, Sunrise Estates has one, Edgewood Estates has one. So this would be number 5, if you agree with it.
But some of these were more community things that had private roads and stuff. I don't think these were all parcels that were subdivided, were they?
Augusta did have that in the middle, but those were subdivisions. I'm not sure of the others. I was not here at that time.
Because I know we've run into these kinds of issues where we've got existing structures and they want to come in and subdivide them up and sell them off rather than continue to lease them out, and we've said no. This one's a little different. I mean, we're talking differences between 25-foot wide lot and 24.55. I mean, geez, we're really getting nitty picky. But is that the intent here? Is we're doing a PD because it doesn't meet our ordinance? Is that the gist of this?
Correct, because we cannot approve a plat unless it meets zoning. The lots created would meet the zoning code.
I hate doing that.
Does everything else, as far as building codes and fire codes or whatever, need to be done to separate it? Everything else this is the only issue?
Probably a question for Tammy. Do they each have an individual service to them?
Yep, they all got different services. They got their own mailboxes, brick with their addresses. I mean, it's one parcel, but there's 4 buildings and 4 separate entrances. There's no basements.
Our big deal at the city level is that they each have their own water and sewer.
One building has, when they built it, has one water. All the other ones have individual water meters.
So that one building you would not be able to, whether they went through this process or not.
Even with the HOA.
Right.
Okay.
So each one has to have its own water service.
Okay.
So are you thinking, Troy, then that these would be what we would consider a little bit more affordable housing? Because that,
Correct.
of course, is a hot topic right now.
Yep, correct. And I mean, I'm sure Ron can look at it, but I mean, I did my own little Zillow stuff. I think there was 2 homes, correct me if I'm wrong, that were under 300,000 for sale in Brandon, and they're built in the 50s. And they're sold in the upper 289. Yeah, sure.
I think I could answer that question. I'm Ron Weber. I'm with Hague Realtors. My address is 27521 481st Avenue, Canton. I put this packet together for you, and when Troy had approached me, as you see the pictures, and we did our homework with the engineering, and that's when we discovered that we were short on some setbacks. Why the need for affordable housing? Right now, as of December 1st, there's 62 active listings in Brandon. 21 are under contract. The first 6 listings are price range between 205 and 305,900. They're all under contract. So the first available home for sale right now as of December 1st, unless there was a couple that got listed here this week, 354,900. 2024 year-to-date sales between 125 and 275. There's been 24 sold units. 3 of them were twin homes, 9 of them were townhouses. Those are all built in the 1950s and 60s. 12 homes that were either fixer-up or flips. They did not qualify for first-time home buyers. The seller of the property is Teco, Troy and Echo. I do have a potential buyer. Like Troy said, he's getting older. He does not want to tackle this project anymore. We do have DBK Properties, Dan and Becky Kaufman. They are interested in doing it. I've also got a list of the properties that they also do currently own in Brandon, and then the properties are below that they have owned. They would be starting out as rentals. Charisma Property Managers out of Sioux Falls would be managing them, and they have a lot of other properties in town right now that they manage for numerous other owners. When I approached Dan with this, they said, I think there's a need for this. And like he said, he's had 4 or 5 tenants that have approached him. Our first goal would be to go in there and talk to each of the tenants to see which one of them, if they wanted to have home ownership. And I broke that down into I had a banker run the numbers. For an FHA South Dakota housing loan, at a current interest rate of 5.875, if we sold them each individual house for $200,000, that would put out at $200,000, we would bump that purchase price to $206,000. And by doing that, we can have the seller pay 3% of their closing cost, so they could walk into one of those units out of pocket expense for homeownership for $981.95. Their current payment would be $1,637, which now them rents would probably go up to about $1,295. So for another $300, they could actually have homeownership. And the second page is if they did have some money to put down and put an estimated down payment of a little over $7,000, that knocked their payment down about $62. So there is definitely a need for that here in the city. If you look at the tax basis, Troy's buildings there run in between $6,400 and $6,800 per taxes per year. It would bring the city. If I did a mill levy at $200,000, that's $3,500 a unit. So you would be doubling your tax basis with not having to do anything other than basically to make this a planned development. I mean, there wouldn't have to be no infrastructure change. There wouldn't have to be no water sewer redone, anything. A shovel of dirt would not have to be turned. And we would have, well, now that Tammy clarified that has to be separate, there would be 12 units that we would be able to make into affordable housing.
Do you know what unit it is that doesn't have water?
No, it's 409.
409.
409. 17. It's the one in the middle of the 3.
If you look at Brian, if you go to your front page, it'd be that one right in the middle. That aerial view. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It would be 17A, 17B, 17C, and 17D.
For a planned development, does there need to be do they need to be like contiguous, or do they need to be connected in anywhere? Because this would, if that's the middle unit, they'd be 3 separate units. They're just on the same street. Does that cause a problem?
I don't think so, since you would be rezoning to it. So you would select what you rezone to it. I don't imagine there has to be a contiguousness. There is always, it's one a spot zone, probably not. It's more of a horseshoe now, but I imagine you're probably okay. Could we get your microphone, Brian?
We just keep hearing that over and over and over, you know, hey, you know, 7 foot setbacks, you know, that the land becomes too expensive and you need affordable housing, and then they still put up $350,000, $400,000 houses on it, so I hear a lot of that sales pitch.
And this, you know, these are already existing. And
No, I know,
I get that, I totally
Yeah.
get that.
So it's not a blueprint, it's not
Yeah,
just a
I know.
hypothetical, this is what it is. You get to see it.
Yeah, I am. I don't have a whole lot of heartburn. It's, in this situation, we're talking a couple of, not even more than a foot that I can see. I think the worst one I can see is 24 foot wide instead of 25. Oh, sorry.
Two of them are 23 and there's 121 in there too.
Oh, I don't see the.
In that middle one? Well, no, that's the one we can't
The
get.
middle one
No,
you can't
the middle one that we can't get, so that does not apply.
And anybody driving by, they're not going to know the difference. My only heartburn is I don't want this to start to set precedents.
But we may have some of that with these older properties. If we want to, you know, progress as a city, we're going to run into these, I'm guessing.
I mean, the only difference we're talking is. I guess, what do we have in place as far as, you know, with all of these being attached and they're in existing condition, if one wants to do a remodel or paint or something like that, is, how are the other ones protected?
As, like if, so let's say I want to change my front end or change the paint.
Yeah, say, you know, unit 16, which falls between 16C wants to do something different than, and it's attached to 16D and 16B and A. What protects the other three?
There really isn't any. It's no different than if like I own a lot of rental property in Sioux Falls and they're individual units. And if the roof gets hailed out, you got to agree with your neighbor that it needs hail. You know, you need a roof
Yeah.
or you need siding. Or if you got to paint, if it's a paint color, y'all got to agree on the paint. But to answer that question, there is no really specific thing unless we turned it into an HOA, and then you would then that would not become affordable then, because then we're going to have outside building maintenance, and that would probably each individual unit be probably $200 to $250 per month, and that's going to kick a lot of these people right out from qualifying because the HOA is too high.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know how all that works, but you know, if one person in the unit afford, hey, I can't afford to reshingle this year, but everybody else wants to, you know.
Well, that's where the insurance would come in.
And all the roofs were just replaced due to
Yeah.
ratio. So hopefully we're good for another 30 years.
So how expensive would that be for you to retrofit that one pod so that you could do it all as a PD? Is that terribly?
One unit?
Yeah, where it's not separated. Is that not even possible?
I don't believe it would because water and sewer is under the ground in one building. You have to tear the building out.
Okay, so that's not, okay,
Tammy, is that,
okay. So that's just gonna be the way it's gonna be, okay.
the sewer would handle it, but there would be no way to get the water there, would there? I mean, to be correct?
Or is there a way?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it, I know there's a water, one unit has the water main in it, and it separates the other four. Purchase three, could we purchase 3 more water meters and have it retrofitted? Now I know.
I could share some horror stories too, so.
are we generally okay with pursuing the PD? We'll write a more complete ordinance and present it next time. Would you prefer to review it again, or would you prefer, if we can get the measurements right and everything, that it just goes to public hearing? If you would prefer PD, if you don't, then let me know too.
I'm not really opposed. I wish we could set some kind of a, I understand Brandon's concern. Are we getting into a situation where we're just doing these, and where do we have, what's our guidance for when we say to do it or not to do it? For this, I think, it's so close. I don't see, functionally, I don't see why what would really cause a problem. When do we say yes and when do we say no? That's the biggest concern I have. Other than if no one else came before us with a problem, I wouldn't have problems specifically with this. It's just what are we opening up our door to next week? As you noticed, there's things that come across here all the time, and we're trying to decide when it's a problem, when it's not a problem, and that's my biggest concern. Is not this; it's what's next, I guess. And Patrick, if you could just double check that on a PD, it's okay to have them separated like that. That seems kind of weird, but
Yep, I imagine so, but I will look. I will confirm.
Part of the PD process, I mean, that would include a zoning change. I mean, so what's being asked tonight is if we generally think it's reasonable to pursue, but it's gonna go through.
Yes.
And it'll
So
be
the text
publication,
would go
and
at the
there'll
same
be-
time as a rezone to it, so
Yeah.
they would go concurrently. So it would be the whole, public hearing, then city council public hearing, and second reading, and effective period, and all that fun stuff. Plenty of notices.
It's a long process.
So, just so I understand, the lots on 16 and 20 and 4, we're considering going into plan development, but not the lots in 17. Now, all right, what is it about a plan development that wouldn't allow the lots in the 17 lots to be in there also?
So it's not the plan. It's not about the plan development. It is, I think it's building code and city code that each property has to have its own utility service.
I get
and those
that.
properties can't, and
Yeah.
those services can't
I get
cross
that.
property.
I get that part.
Yep.
I get that part. But so I'm saying, so they'd be able to sell the 16 and the 20 and the 4, but the 17 would still be rentals.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so is there a thing in plan development that says you can't have owned and rented in the same plan development?
No.
I think what Alicia's trying to get to is we could still leave that in there as a fourplex instead of individually platting it.
Yep.
We could still leave it in if they do need to be contiguous or whatever you want to call that.
Yes.
We could still leave it in the PD, just have it as a fourplex instead of,
We would add it as probably
I think that's kind of where you're.
Yeah, we would add it as some other. We'd have to have a second use in the PD, but it would be that use that would be slightly different than the other, but it would same attached. Yes, we could if that is your preference. If that would clear up that.
Or if it's your preference, or if it solves a problem versus creates a problem, or
No,
whatever.
if we can't do it, then we do all 16, just like you are all saying, and then we just specify, or you put in that has to be a rental because you can't cross over property lines. Because you guys, we can't do that.
Well,
with
it just
the
wouldn't be
ordinance.
individually platted. It would just be
That
Right.
would say
be
the
one
same.
plat.
That would
instead
just
of-
say the
It
same.
just stays how it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because you could sell those 5 and those 4 and
12.
17, you could sell that as one.
One unit. That would have to be sold as a fourplex. Yep, as one unit.
So I know there's more of these types of units farther up Ninth Street. Are those owned by someone else?
Correct. These are just the ones I own.
These are just the ones that you own.
And most of those are individually platted, like they're trying to do here. They're individually platted.
Okay, do we need anything more for Patrick at this point?
My impression is you are okay moving forward with the plan development. Would you prefer to look at a draft next meeting, or do you prefer a public hearing next meeting? Basically, can you trust me to put together the language? If you want to review it ahead of time, it's completely fine.
Well, you send it out ahead of time, right?
We do.
You okay with that? Okay, we're good. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for your
Thank you.
patience.
So, just to clarify, what does that mean? I'm new to this.
Yep, so I will work on finalizing some language. We will get it noticed for public hearing. In the meantime, I will provide that to you all so you can review it as well to make sure what I put together is correct. Eventually, it'll go to a public hearing, likely the first meeting of planning and zoning in January. Yep. And then planning and zoning will have a public hearing, kind of like you saw with the home occupation. People can come up and say their piece if they want to. Chances are with this, it's probably going to be just you, but who knows? People can come. City council will do the same thing. City council will do a second reading with, then, of course, it has to get published in the paper, and that's, state law. And then 20 days, if 5% of people don't want it to go to a public vote, if they want it to go to a public vote, they'll submit a petition, then it'll be it's a whole complicated process, but chances are you're looking at February, probably late February when it's all effective, but it takes roughly 90 days.
There'll be a rezone sign posted on the property too, which could alert some citizens.
Yep, exactly.
So you may get some questions because people are curious.
Don't, that's, just so I know, like I said, this is kind of new to me.
And then people will get a letter in the mail too for the rezone, right?
Yes.
So within 300 feet?
Yep, I send out letters. So that's in city code. So
And then that can create some concern, so in case you get something, or they may come to the meeting.
So you're gonna be in touch with me then, Patrick? You got my information?
Yep.
Okay. Super. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Let's see. Are we going down? Oh, now we're going to R2 zoning?
we are on the alcohol.
Oh, we're down-
No,
now we're-
R2. Nope, you're correct. So this is what we kind of talked about briefly last time. There's the lot and yard regs in the R2 didn't quite make sense. I think it was single family detached. If it was next to an R1, it actually went from 7 to 5. So there were some numbers that got off there. We talked, and you wanted the side yard setback for single family attached to match single family detached at 5 feet. So then that would appropriately reference exception number 5. So if that were next to an R1 lot, that it would have to meet the R1 setback on that side. So that's what this kind of does. Whether you want to break it down in such a way that we have single family attached 2 on 2 lots or single family attached on 1 lot, we had talked about kind of clarifying our residential regs. If you just want to keep our kind of our format we have now, we certainly can, or if we just want to deal with that later. But that's kind of the intent, to have the 5 and with exception 5. We can either deal with the breaking out the uses when we deal with the residential districts generally later, or we can try to do that for R2 now, however you want to do it. We can modify existing, or we can add the 3, that the different ways. So whatever you would like. Try not to complicate it. I get probably the format on 17 does probably a little bit. So right now we have single family attached broadly as one category. It does not break down whether it's 3 to 8 or it's 1 lot or 2 lots, and then we have single family attached surrounded by commonly owned space. So we can either keep that format for now, or we can try to break it down. I am okay either way, whatever is easiest to get the job done for now.
business, and if we can break out that one thing and accomplish that, I'm for that.
Brian looked skeptical.
Differences of what we have now side by side with what's proposed.
Yep, so what we have now does not, single family attached just is a category, single family attached. We talked about setting, back when we talked about generally residential districts having some issues, we talked about standards for if it was on single family attached on one lot, whether attached to each other or horizontally or vertically. We talked about 2 lots, or we talked about there's of course the larger 3 to 8. So if you just want to keep the current language, I can just mess around with that and we can deal with the whole adding categories once we more flesh out the discussion later. If that would just be easiest for now, since we're trying to think through complicated things at 9 o'clock at night. So if we were to amend our existing language, we would take the single-family attached category, we would change the 10-foot non-party wall side to a 5. We would keep the C number 5, and we would change the single-family attached platted lot surrounded by commonly owned space. We would also change that 10 to a 5 and keep C exception number 5. Because that would allow the increase to 7 next to an R1. So maybe that's the easiest way to do it. It's the less changes all at once, then we can deal with the general cleanup later.
I'll backstep then and say, yeah, if we can accomplish that and reduce the risk of having to chase our tail later, yes.
So what do we need to do tonight?
I just wanted to make sure that this reflects your understanding of how you wanted it to read. If we use the existing table and just make that the 10s to 5s on single family attached rather than adding the 3 categories, you just use the existing table, would you be okay with scheduling a public hearing on it?
I am.
I think I'm fine with that.
We're good? Sir, you've been sitting out there for a long time. Are you here for something special?
The Verbo stuff.
Oh, the Verbo stuff. Okay.
So the next one I hope will be quick. I just kind of have one question for you on the alcohol stuff.
You've been telling me that all day.
I
It's
know,
going to be
I'm
quick.
hoping. I'm hopeful.
Sorry, sir. Okay, we'll get right to you. Okay, go for it.
Yep. So, are you all okay with the public hearing on the last one? So, what this alcohol one does is the problem with the current retail, service, or trade language in the light industrial is that it only allows it in conjunction with a primary use wholesaling and manufacturing. So then you would have a wholesale manufacturing industrial operation with a retail that would have alcohol on top of that. So it's kind of seemed to be the case that you would, with retail, service, and trade, you wanted to allow the alcohol sales just in conjunction with those, rather than kind of the 3 layers of the industrial business with the retail with an alcohol. So that's what that attempts to do. Did you want to allow both on and off sale in LI and HI, or just off sale, or just on sale?
I don't know if we need to have off sale. I think the point is if it's some kind of an establishment that people are going, I don't think we need to have people going into an industrial park to buy a 6-pack and head home.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. That was the example provided too, and I agree. I'd lean towards on sale only.
I'm in agreement as well.
Everybody good with that, Ansel? Okay. All right. You need anything else, Patrick, on that one?
Nope.
Okay. Getting down to verbal. All right. Is this a discussion? This is a discussion item?
Yes. So
Okay.
to frame it into context, it becomes difficult. About 6 to 8 months ago, we had talked about, do we want to do anything with short-term rentals? The decision from you all was we don't want to deal with it unless it becomes a problem. We get questions on it often. I took probably 2 or 3 today alone. So it has become potentially an issue that we just want some direction on. Obviously, with the home occupation there, we took the direction contrary to what you would prefer. So we're just trying to flesh out some direction. Right now, based on a conversation with the city administrator, how we would treat a standalone verbo would be as a business use in a residential, which would be effectively prohibited. Is that how you want that to be? Not in someone's house where they live, but just if you buy a house and you want it to be the verbo you lease out for side income. The current staff interpretation would be that is a business in a residential, which would be prohibited.
Just
And
curious.
sir, you're here to talk about that, or you're just here to listen, or? Okay, okay. If you have something, just come on up.
Can I, so in that interpretation, how is owning a residential structure and leasing it different than a verbo, and how is that not a business? If I own a structure that happens to be in an R1 and I lease it out on a yearly contract, how is that different than if I own a structure in an R1 and I lease it out on a weekly contract? Or 4 days a week, or 2 weeks, or...
So the thinking there kind of was, if you are solely leasing it out, what makes it different than a hotel?
What makes it different than a single-family house that's leased out on a yearly contract?
That's the struggle we run into. Then what is a hotel versus a home?
Oh, you certainly have. You certainly have more than, a family unit plus 2 in a hotel. You have, so I mean, I think there's certainly a distinction between a hotel and because they would still have to follow the limits of what we allow in a single family unit as far as how many people can stay there, and maybe we need to look at what we allow under single family. Maybe that might be something where we have to make sure that our ordinance is clear on that. And 2, the questions that you're getting, are they primarily from people that are wanting to do this, or are they people that are concerned about other people doing it?
It's about half and half.
Okay.
Some people want to know what is our process for starting one, and other ones is how can I keep my neighbor from doing it. So it's hard. We've to this point kind of taken the more conservative approach. We're on more defense than just letting it go, just because once it's out, it's out. So we just kind of wanted clarification how to proceed, since it does come up pretty often. And I know the definition of family is something we talked about when we had our general discussion about all the residential stuff, and that'll come up again the second we can get an agenda that's not 2.5 to 3 hours long, and we can actually work through some of these things without having a loaded plate already. But
Well, isn't Sioux Falls dealing with this, and the county? I mean,
Yep.
I mean, there's no sense reinventing the wheel if we could, see what they're doing. I know one thing we had talked about earlier was if we put some stipulations in, how are we going to enforce it? Who's going to monitor it? We don't have staff to do that. So unless it's just a complaint basis kind of situation that is now with, yards and stuff. So that's another consideration.
kind of the big one is, do you care to regulate it? There are certainly a number of residents that would prefer you do, but there's also Paul's gonna be a busy guy.
I know, you gotta hire another staff member almost, because people can just add it to, I could go home and add mine right now. I mean, no one would know, I mean, unless if you went to go look, but.
We do have some. So the big thing that people would probably run into is that they start that up, but there's a whole lot more that goes into it. You have to have a state sales tax license. There's a lot of extra stuff that I don't know if you care about regulating. I wish people would look that stuff, at a minimum, look that stuff up and do it right. But
I mean, I'm just speaking just how I think of an Airbnb or whatever. It seems like, I mean, if people were concerned about them, that they're going to be run down and stuff, most of them, I would say, aren't, because they want good reputation and people to come back to them. So usually they're maybe more kept up than the neighboring houses sometimes. I'm not saying every time, but from my experience, they are. And I don't want to ignore that if there is a problem, we want to have enough code, regulations, ordinance, whatever you want to call it, that if there is a problem, there's something that can be done. But I think that I think maybe the right angle might be to make sure that our single family, and maybe these are happening in R2 as well, but make sure that those ordinance are where we want them, so that if there's 10 people living in a 2-bedroom house, that's not okay. But I think that our ordinance say that. So I think that might be the way to go, and have something, well, you have to follow these ordinance. But I don't know if we want to regulate it as a business. I'm not sure.
Go ahead. Just give us your name and address, please.
My name is Joey Larson. I live at 420 North Oak Ridge Road. I didn't expect to speak tonight, so I would advise you to keep it simple if you are going to do any regulation. So I've got multiple Airbnbs in Sioux Falls, and what I would, simpler you make it, the easier it is for people that aren't doing it professionally like me to navigate the process of starting an Airbnb. So I don't think that you want to take away the freedom of our citizens by regulating it so aggressively that the common person can't figure it out. But if you wanted to regulate it, a suggestion I would have would be just like a simple permit. And if you have problems, then you can revoke the permit.
Is that what Sioux Falls does?
Sioux Falls got a few more steps.
Okay.
I don't know if you know the exact steps, but it's.
I do not.
So you file a permit. You also have to do a class, and then there's an inspection once a year. So it's not super strenuous at all, but the way they have it written is that also if you hire a property manager, the property manager can do those steps on your behalf as a property owner.
Brookings has some guidelines too, being a university college or university town, that property owners have to have, I don't know exactly what the requirements are, so don't quote me on this, but I believe property owners that rent out property have to have a property management company in town if you live out of town. So there has to be somebody there that's able to handle issues, and that might be something that we would want to consider too, just so that if you have a out-of-town owner, if there's an issue, there's someone locally that can be, that's just, when you talk about having a property manager, that kind of came to mind.
The one thing that comes to my mind is like vehicles. So like if there's, if I'm there with my 2 kids, so we've got 3-4 cars, do you run into that problem?
So all of my units have off-street parking. So I have really had zero problems with any of our neighbors, any complaints at all. The property manager I also chose is very professional. So immediately when we start a new project, he goes goes once a year and introduces himself to the neighbors. Leaves a business card, says, "Call me, family problems, please, I'm here to help you." We've got surveillance cameras on our properties. It's got off-street parking. As a property manager, especially, and as a property owner, you're very interested in having only the amount of people that have been declared. Meaning that if they say they're coming with 4 people, if there's 6, what's going on? Why are we having this problem? So, as far as property being degraded or having issues being damaged, my Airbnbs are nicer than my long-term rentals by far. They're maintained, cleaned every 2-3 days, and people don't have like enough time to dwell at the property to be to like start to kind of think this place kind of sucks and like start destroying things. So our Airbnbs are stay and maintained way nicer than our long-term rentals do. So
Are your Airbnbs places where nobody is living there? Like these folks who were in earlier, they live in the house and they want to rent out part of their house. And so, you know, the renters could end up mingling. You could all end up watching TV together or whatever.
yep.
But-
So my Airbnbs are short-term and mid-term rentals. So meaning short-term is anything less than a month. Mid-term is month to 6 months. So if someone came to me and said I wanted to rent it for a year and I want to pay the exorbitant cost of having a furnished rental for a year, I would gladly take them on that. So, but yeah, we don't have any owner-occupied type things. So that was it's very common in Sioux Falls. If you look, just do a simple search on Airbnb, you'll see that there's hundreds in Sioux Falls where people are just renting out a room or their basement or anything like that. So that scenario was nothing new to at least the Sioux Falls market. Absolutely, yeah. So, and then just one more thought. In Brandon itself, there is one Airbnb on the platform at all, and then there's also one in Corson. So the reason I came to the meeting is because I'm actively trying to target Brandon as one to add, because if I could have 50% of the market share, I'd be pretty happy with that. But I also wanted to know what everyone thought about it. 'Cause
Don't
obviously
downplay
I don't want to buy
Corson.
one
I
here
mean,
if it's going
don't
to get regulated.
downplay Corson. That's a destination spot.
So,
So where do we want to go with this, guys? Ladies, where do we want to go?
Do you want to think on it for a couple weeks? So I get, 9, 10 p.m. Everyone's brain's probably mush at this point.
Well, I'd like, maybe we could get a copy of the permit that Sioux Falls, I mean, just something to look at. Do they have a permit for these folks that are just renting out a room in their, that's different. That, in their owner occupied, that's different. Do you know?
I think if you run a short-term rental in Sioux Falls, you're required to have a permit.
Even if you are living in it?
Yep.
Okay,
So,
okay, good to know. All right.
yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, we appreciate your patience, thank you. All right, anything else for the good of the cause? I think,
Building permits, if you want to
okay,
discuss.
saw
Paul's
those,
out there
okay.
working hard.
Thank you, Paul, we appreciate it.
So as of today, so as of the end of November, we have issued 48 new single-family homes. In 2023, that number was 15, so now it's 48. Multifamily last year was 0. This year is 147. think the number is like 2.4, 2.7. Yeah.
All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Adjourn.
Second.
We are done at 9:12. Wow. Oh, 9:13.